You think you are choosing. You pull into an Exxon station, glance at the prices of the Chevron across the street, and perhaps decide to keep driving until you hit a Mobile. You feel like a participant in a free market, a sovereign consumer navigating the tides of supply and demand. But look closer at the logos on those signs. You are not seeing competition. In reality, you are wandering through a graveyard of ghosts. You are seeing the fragments of a shattered mirror, and every jagged piece still reflects the same cold, calculating face. The year is 2026, and you are still paying a dividend to a man who has been dead for nearly a century. Every time you fill your tank, every time you pay a utility bill, every time the price of a plastic-wrapped gallon of milk ticks upward because of transport costs, you are feeding the ghost of Standard Oil. You have been told the story of how the brave trustbusters saved the American dream by slaying the corporate dragon. It is a comforting bedtime story. It is also a lie. The 1911 breakup of Standard Oil was not a decapitation. It was a multiplication. Now, let us open the case file on the monopoly dividend and reveal the shadow behind the success. By the turn of the 20th century, John D. Rockefeller did not just own an industry. He owned the circulatory system of the United States. Through his creation, the Standard Oil Trust, he controlled 90% of the refining and marketing of petroleum. If you wanted to light your home or lubricate a factory gear, you paid John D. He did not just play the game. He bought the stadium, the referees, and the printing press that made the tickets. To the public, he was the monster of 26 Broadway. To the government, he was a sovereign power operating within their borders. On May 15, 1911, the highest court in the land finally swung the axe. Chief Justice Edward Douglas White handed down the decision in Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus United States. The court ruled that Standard Oil was an unreasonable monopoly under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The decree was absolute. The trust was to be dismantled. The monster was to be torn limb from limb. The myth of 1911 is that the government won. The newspaper headlines of the era painted Rockefeller as a broken man, his empire reduced to rubble. But Rockefeller knew something the politicians did not. He knew that a single, massive oak tree is easy to target, but a forest of interconnected saplings is impossible to kill. The breakup was elegant in its initial brutality. First, the court ordered the parent company to divest itself of all its subsidiaries. Second, it gave them 6 months to hand over the keys. Third, it effectively forced the birth of 34 separate baby standards. These are the names you know today. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. But here is the forensic reality. The smoking gun buried in the ledger of the decree. While the companies were forced to be separate entities, the shareholders remained the same. John D. Rockefeller did not lose his oil. He simply traded one large, dusty stock certificate for 34 shiny new ones. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare tearing through the exchange floor. A paperwork hurricane. Clerks frantically dissecting a monolithic empire, splitting a single share into 34 distinct fractions, printing a blizzard of new certificates. Imagine you own a single, massive gold bar. The government tells you it is illegal to own a bar that size. So, you take a hammer and shatter it into 34 smaller nuggets. You still own the same amount of gold, but now, because the nuggets are easier to trade and more people want them, the total value of those pieces begins to skyrocket. That gold bar was Standard Oil, a company so massive it had become stagnant, weighed down by its own gravity. By forcing it to break, the Supreme Court did not destroy Rockefeller's wealth. They gave it wings. While the public was popping champagne to celebrate the death of the octopus, John D. Rockefeller was on the golf course. He did not look like a man who had just lost his life's work. Rockefeller did not panic when the ruling came down, because he had already run the scenario. For years, his lawyers had wargamed a breakup, not as a threat, but as a strategy. He understood something the court did not. You can regulate a company. You cannot regulate ownership. When a reporter asked him for a comment on the court's decision to dismantle his empire, Rockefeller simply smiled and offered a piece of advice. Buy Standard Oil. It sounded like the delusional rambling of a defeated king. It was actually the most profitable insider tip in the history of the human race. To understand why, we have to look at the technical mechanism of the 1911 decree. The Supreme Court did not order Rockefeller to sell his company to the highest bidder and disappear into the night. They ordered a pro rata distribution. In plain English, the trust was a giant vault. Inside that vault were 34 smaller safes, each representing a regional subsidiary. Indiana, California, New Jersey, New York. The court ordered the big vault door to be ripped off, but they left the keys to all 34 smaller safes in the hands of the exact same people who owned the big one. On paper, it looked like destruction. But on Wall Street, it looked like an initial public offering times 34. One morning, there was a single, untouchable giant. The next, there were 34 independent companies, each with its own ticker, its own story, its own promise of growth. Investors did not see a corpse. They saw inventory. In 1911, Standard Oil was not just big, it was opaque. There was no clean balance sheet, no segment reporting, no way to price its parts. On Wall Street, that is called a conglomerate discount. When something is so large and tangled, the market assumes it is hiding inefficiency, or worse. Then the breakup forced disclosure. Suddenly, investors could see the margins on kerosene in New Jersey, the pipeline tolls in Pennsylvania, the explosive growth of gasoline demand in a country falling in love with the automobile. And the market did what it always does when uncertainty dies. It repriced everything. Violently. Upward. Money did not trickle in. It flooded. Pension funds, rail barons, European capital. Everyone wanted exposure to oil, but now, for the first time, they could choose which part of the empire to bet on. Refining, transport, exploration. What had been one impenetrable fortress became 34 open doors. And capital walked through every single one. These were not struggling startups. They were lean, mean, cash-generating machines that had been suppressed by the overhead of the central trust. Released from the mother ship, they began to compete, not on price, which would have helped your wallet, but on efficiency. Standard Oil of New Jersey and Standard Oil of New York suddenly had to prove their worth to new investors. They cut costs, optimized pipelines, and raced to grab new oil fields in Texas and the Middle East. Not every baby standard succeeded. Some struggled. Some lagged behind the pack. But it did not matter, because Rockefeller did not need all of them to win. He just needed enough of them to trigger massive multiple expansion. Every time these companies grew, every time they unlocked a breakup premium and drove their stock prices higher, the wealth flowed back to the exact same reservoir. John D. Rockefeller owned roughly 25% of the original Standard Oil Trust. After the breakup, he suddenly owned 25% of Exxon, 25% of Mobil, 25% of Chevron, 25% of Amoco, and 30 others. The numbers are obscene. In 1911, right before the breakup, Rockefeller's net worth was estimated at around $300 million. By 1913, just 2 years after the defeat in court, his wealth had ballooned to over $900 million. That is nearly $30 billion in today's inflation-adjusted currency, but even that number fails to capture the scale. In 1913, $900 million was equal to roughly 2% of the entire United States gross domestic product. If one man owned 2% of the United States economy today, he would not just be a billionaire, he would be a nation-state. He would be worth over $500 billion, making modern tech titans look like lottery winners in comparison. This is the forensic fact the history books skip. The breakup was the greatest wealth creation event in history, for the very man it was meant to punish. The monopoly dividend was not just a check in the mail. It was the realization that cartel behavior fueled by immense institutional flow, is far more profitable than a single, bloated monopoly. As the baby standards grew, they began to act like a hydra. When the government cut off one head, two more grew back, leaner and hungrier. They moved into the burgeoning automobile market. They funded the highways. They achieved complete regulatory capture, lobbying the politicians who had just defeated them. They used their new, independent status to bypass the very laws designed to restrain them. You see, a monopoly is a target. It is a giant, slow-moving target with a bullseye on its chest. But an oligopoly? That is a ghost. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is textbook price leadership. No calls, no meetings, just silent alignment. It is the price of gas rising by 3 cents at every station in town on the same Tuesday morning. It is the illusion of choice in an aisle where every brand is owned by the same 3 parent companies. Rockefeller did not lose his power in 1911. He decentralized it. He realized that if you own the pipes, it does not matter what color the trucks are painted. And as the stock prices of the 34 sisters began to climb, the man who lost the biggest antitrust case in history became the richest man to ever walk the earth. The gavel had not fallen on his neck. It had fallen on a start button. The true legacy of the 1911 breakup was not found in a courtroom. It was found in the ink of a new narrative. Rockefeller realized that while his money had multiplied, his reputation was still in the gutter. He had the gold, but he needed the grace. So, he took the same logic he used to dismantle Standard Oil and applied it to his own soul. He did not just break up his company. He broke up his identity. He poured his monopoly dividend into foundations, universities, and medical research. He transformed from the monster of 26 Broadway into the kindly old man handing out shiny new dimes to children. It was the ultimate corporate rebrand, a blueprint for every billionaire who has followed. They do not just want your money. They want your gratitude for returning a fraction of what they took. But look at the reality behind the curtain. The 1911 execution of Standard Oil created a world of synthetic competition. Today, when you see a price war between 2 gas stations, you are not seeing a battle for your business. You are seeing a choreographed dance. The 34 sisters may have different names, but they share the same DNA, the same institutional investors, and the same fundamental goal: to ensure the cost of energy never falls too low for their comfort. This is the verdict on the Rockefeller strategy. When a monopoly becomes too big to ignore, it does not die. It undergoes mitosis. It splits, hides, and thrives.
The harvest begins.
We see it today, in the whispers of breaking up big tech, In 2026, Wall Street has a name for this playbook. A classic sum-of-the-parts arbitrage, where breaking the machine makes every piece worth more than the whole. When activists push to break up a tech giant, they are not trying to destroy it. They are trying to liberate its parts. The Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission circle the titans of Silicon Valley, sharpening the exact same antitrust axes used in 1911. The media calls it a reckoning. Wall Street calls it capital rotation. Institutional investors are salivating, knowing that if the cloud division gets a premium multiple, the ad business gets spun off, or the artificial intelligence arm becomes a standalone growth stock, the standalone pieces will command massive premiums. And the same shareholders? They own all of it. Just like Rockefeller did. The cost to you? It is the efficiency tax. You pay it every time a real competitor is swallowed, before they can disrupt the status quo. You pay it every time a barrier to entry is erected or a patent is bought just to be buried. You pay it because the system is designed to reward the Hydra over the hero. The 1911 breakup proved that regulation is not always a leash. Sometimes it is a fertilizer. The archives show us that power is rarely destroyed. It is merely redistributed into forms that are harder to track and easier to ignore. We live in the house that John D. built, and the rent is due every single day. If you owned shares in a company about to be broken up, and history told you it would triple your money, would you root for regulation or quietly pray for it? So here is the question no one in power wants to answer. Was 1911 a failure of regulation? Or was it the moment the system learned how to reward failure at scale? Because if breaking a monopoly is the fastest way to make its owners richer, then every future crackdown stops looking like justice and starts looking like a strategy.